we're going to start because it's already 1:10 Riga time. I'm Dara Mille. I will be moderating this panel. I'm part also of the NAYA Association in Karlsruhe, and I'm very honored to be here with the session called Terrestrial Coexistence. We start now, and it will last 1 hour and 40 minutes approximately. So we are going to come to an end like 20 to 3. I will just make a little introduction into the topic of the panel, and then also greet all the panelists. And after each presentation, we have today 4 speakers. We will have some time also for questions from the audience. So if you have any comments, ideas, questions, please put them into the chat. I will collect everything and then also put questions to the audience, to the speakers, or also if we are not that many, that is probably the case at the moment, you can also just switch on your mic and also ask the questions after the speakers' presentations. So terrestrial coexistence is such a huge topic, and I think there are so many entries also into this topic. As a curator and art practitioner, I have already been dealing with a lot with the theories of Bruno Latour, so I naturally also see this topic through the lens that Bruno Latour is proposing. And so we live in the times of ecological crisis, in the times that Isabel Stengers also denotes as times of intrusion of Gaia. So we as humans also, of course, feel that we have impact on the Earth systems and on the environment we live in. Therefore, philosophers and art practitioners and artists, of course, are looking for answer to a question how to survive on the Earth, how to still make the Earth inhabitable also in the future. And one of the answers that they are giving to this is like becoming terrestrial again, and take into account also material conditions, of course, of our existence, and also see how we can redefine our relationships with the life forms on Earth, with life forms, but also with material forms of existence in terms of non-extractivist practices. And of course, also the notion of becoming terrestrial challenges us both to leave behind the modernist promise of endless progression, and also withdrawal into the sense of national belonging and identity. And instead, probably what is needed, we need to find a common ground together with also other forms of life, together with other disciplines, together with other practitioners. Also, we have to recognize that each entity or each life form is producing its own time and space, and that is that these times and spaces also offer to us, so to speak, a new system of coordinates. So it's not Cartesian coordinates that we know from the sciences, but more also the system of relationships that we need to build anew with other species. So finding a new common ground and ways of coexistence is thus different from an all-encompassing metric space. It has to acknowledge the many specific situations and dependencies of each life form. It has to acknowledge that it is not the same thing to live on the globe and to live enfolded into the space that reacts to our actions and that is sensitive to us. And in this session, we will have an insight into new ways to build up these relationships and also assemblies and modes of feeling the terrestrial, and also becoming sensible to these relationships. And I also invite you to participate in this multifarious process. So we will start today with the presentation by Christina Bauer. She will present a paper or like presentation developed together with Marjan de Meij and Lenie van Goidesenhofen. And I will just quickly present Christina. She lives and works in Belgium and Finland, and she's an artist and scientist focused on non-human life forms. She's instigator of artistic long-term initiatives like Melliferopolis, Bees in Urban Environments, or Institute for Relocation of Biodiversity, concerned with loss of diversity and habitats and proposing speculative, symbolic, absurd solutions to save the planet and its other than human inhabitants. She's also a member of the BioArt Society Finland, and currently she is a postdoctoral researcher at Center for Synthetic Biology at Ghent University and Department for Bioethics, University of Antwerp, Belgium. So, Christina, the stage is yours. You can share the screen and start the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Daria, for this introduction. I think it really gave a very nice context of what we are going to talk about, and I'm super curious also to hear from the others. I will share my screen. Oh. And I don't manage here.
You don't have rights to share?
Yes, that's the thing.
Okay.
Wait, maybe now.
I will then, because we have somebody here also from RIXC.
But I have to leave everything now. I'm gonna be back soon.
Okay. I will just, because I think that RIXC Mediateca is somebody from the team of RIXC, and if you are there, please answer.
I am quite certain that I am allowed to share my screen, so I don't think the problem was on the organizational side.
Okay.
Well, yes, I am.
You can
I can share my screen. So.
Okay, super. We can see now your presentation, Christina.
All right. Sorry for that complication.
Can you ask if they can see?
Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
It's not full mode. Yes.
Now it is.
Yes. Now it is.
All right. Okay. Sorry for that. So yeah, the project I would like to share with you today is called Bacto Healing. And it's a project that I started quite recently in April at the University of Ghent. And it's a mix of art, science, and philosophy. So it's quite a special transdisciplinary project also for being an academic project. And I want to start with how this came to be, because I think it's quite important. So the project is around kintsugi, which is an ancient Japanese method to fix ceramics. And the way this is being fixed is by first gluing with a natural lacquer, but then on the surface gold or silver is applied. So the crack becomes very visible, and actually the aesthetics of the repaired object, they are enhancing the crack. So the crack, the imperfection becomes actually the art piece in itself. But also there's a special aesthetics of the repair. So it's not just the crack that you see, but you also see, of course, the repair. And this is what intrigued me very much, because there is the aspect of healing in this transformative repair that, is it okay? Some technical problems again?
Yes. So people can see you.
Okay, thanks. So this transformative repair intrigued me very much because the crack that is then visible reminded me of a scar. So for me, the process of repairing was almost like creating a scar after you have had a wound. And this is how I started to my research. And then I was invited in Italy to an earthquake region where people had lost their houses, they had lost all their belongings, and there were lots of broken ceramics. So they asked me to come and do a workshop with the population. And there, this aspect of healing became also conceptual, because I felt that as we were together fixing the objects, people were talking about their trauma of the loss. So there was another aspect of healing that became quite visible in this. And in 2018, I was a visiting researcher in Aalto University in Finland. And I proposed to start investigating this kintsugi to really create a scar tissue with bacteria. And so here you see the first experiments that I did at that moment. And this bacteria was colorful. This is why I selected it. But also it has antibacterial properties. It's from a skin of a lizard. And it has antibacterial properties. So I chose this also because sometimes people say when you have a crack in a bowl or something, it becomes unhygienic. So the idea was to add also this property of becoming more hygienic. And out of this research, I tried to really create a longer-term scientific investigation to find bacteria that actually also have gluing capacities, because at that moment, the bacteria that I selected was really just for aesthetic reasons. And this is how I contacted the professor in Ghent, the Professor Marianne de May. She is professor of biotechnologies, so synthetic biology and genetic engineering. And together with another professor in Antwerp University, who is into bioethics, we created this project Back to Healing, with the idea of really trying to find microbiological life forms that can actually fix a crack in mineral objects, but at the same time also look at how we are working with microbiological life forms that are quite abstract in a laboratory setting, or also in general, how scientists are dealing with this bacteria and mycelium and genetic engineering. And this is how the project came to be. And the first line of workings that we are trying, so we have three different lines of working, and the first one is with mycelium. So it's with a fungus called Ganoderma lucidum. And here I'm collaborating with a lab that has a lot of experience with mycelium, but they are trying to create large leathery surfaces. So for them, it's about creating large surfaces with this fungus. For me, and these are images of first experiments, it's about the adhesive property of the fungus. And here you see an image where we are trying to glue, I mean, this is just the first experiment, a microscopic slide. So this is glass, and we are trying to grow the mycelium on the crack or between these two pieces of broken slide to see if the gluing capacity of the mycelium is enough to actually hold these two pieces together. And here you see that the mycelium is very vital and it's growing a bit everywhere. So yeah, if the adhesive properties are really good, we don't know, but then maybe the genetic engineering is coming also into action. When you grow the mycelium, at a certain point, you have to stop the growth. And usually you do this by killing the mushroom. So in the laboratory, you have to then heat it. So you put it into an oven and heat it for 24 hours, about 70 degrees. But this is quite a drastic action. I mean, you're doing everything to make this mycelium grow. And then after, at a certain moment, you're just deciding over the death of this entity. And I was reading a paper about how to do this immobilization. And I found very interesting how this paper was talking about it, because they never called this activity killing or stopping the life. They always said kind of euphemistic words like inactivating or achieving stable configurations. And I found this quite interesting, that even though in the lab you have to do this, because otherwise you cannot continue to work with this material, you are still trying to avoid this very harsh word of killing. So I sense that there might be already a cognitive dissonance in the scientific world about how to deal with this very manipulative way of working with microbiological life forms. And this is where the University of Antwerp comes in, the Department for Bioethics. Because what we proposed in the project is that we would use the method of ethics by design. So we would try to include these philosophical considerations from the very beginning of the project. And to make ethics not an afterthought, but really part of the methodology that we're using. And this is now quite difficult, because the lab where I'm working, they are hardcore scientists, and they have a quite busy schedule, and they have protocols that apply in the laboratory. And now the ethicists come and they try to apply other protocols and to make people see or act differently. So this transdisciplinary approach poses a problematic situation in itself, because usually, in my experience, when you work transdisciplinary, it's very often that the two disciplines make their research in parallel, and only at the end, maybe they share their findings. But to really get your hands dirty by trying to influence and trying to get information from the other discipline is not easy. Also, we're not speaking the same language. So there's all kinds of difficulties that arise through this, but I think it's the only way of going about a project like this. So what we have now decided is to create a toolbox of very practical protocols and maybe rituals to see how we can integrate this ethical approach into an everyday lab practice. And this will have to do with, sustainable lab practices, but also deciding over this manipulation and the death of microorganisms. It will have to do with maybe learning from microorganisms about healing. So we are trying to really look at this, because we just started from the beginning to integrate this ethical aspect. And here I want to share one practice that impressed me very much. I went to Japan for a visit, and I met Professor Hideo Iwasaki, who's also a biotechnologist. And he started with some colleagues of his yearly practice or yearly ritual, where they go to this shrine and they make once a year, really for a whole day, a memorial service for microorganisms that have been killed or have left their life in the laboratory. And this is one way of doing it. And I think in the lab itself, maybe not so much is changing, but probably in the approach and in the way that we are seeing these other life forms, something could actually change. So this is just one way of going about it and an example. And the last thing that I want to mention is a book that will be published at the end of the year. It's called Chance Encounters, and it is about bioethics. It's written by Christine Hens, and it is really challenging the notion of bioethics, because very often, especially since the 50s, there were also bioethicists before that were a bit wider, but especially after the Second World War, bioethics was a little bit pushed into this biomedical ethics corner. And now if you have to do an ethical survey, or if you have to do ethical considerations, very often it only has to do with satisfying some legal rules, and so, but it's very rare that by design the ethical considerations are really part of the project. And so in her book she is trying to pull the bioethics back into biology and to really claim a position at the scientific table from the very beginning. And I'm also mentioning this book because Christine asked me and Bart, who will be presenting in the afternoon here in RIXC, to provide some visual complements to her book, because many of our artistic projects have to do with bioethics, but not in this classical sense, but more in the sense that Christine is trying to claim it back. So yeah, the book is coming out with open book publishers, so it will be available open source, and look out for it. And this was my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. And at this stage also, we are quite open for feedback or best practices or experiences that other people have in transdisciplinary collaborations where really such disparate disciplines trying to work together. So I'm very open to hear if anybody has experiences or wants to share something about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. I don't know, are there any immediate questions or responses from the audience, from other speakers, and also from the audience? Okay, if there are no responses, yes, thank you so much, Christina. And it was a really wonderful example also of what I was also speaking about in the introduction, like how also different disciplines can come together again to build this common ground, to think of our practices also in another way. And it reminds me also very strong about what Isabel Stengers wrote in the Slow Science Manifesto, because it's it's not only about quantification, about reaching some results, but it's also about thinking how we can basically think of ethics and also of matters of concern that also we share, or scientists share with the common public also inside the research. So it's really a super interesting example. Thank you so much. I was like very much interested just in understanding also what is the next step for you, because you showed also this experiments with mycelium and adhesive qualities of mycelium, but how probably could you elaborate a bit also on what is the next step for you also as artist and
so indeed, since this is very much based in the arts, also this project, the idea is to create artifacts that can be exhibited, and that maybe exhibit together with just aesthetics, also the idea behind it. And at the moment we are trying to work with a museum who they have one very old Chinese plate, which was fixed with classic kintsugi, but it was fixed already 400 or 500 years ago. So it's really an antique piece. And the idea was to use this as a basis and to copy this plate, to break it at the same place where it was broken originally, and to try and use microbiological life forms to fix it again. So to actually reenact the kintsugi, but with mycelium and bacteria. And we're now in the process of 3D scanning and trying to copy this plate in a similar, it's a porcelain plate, which is quite a difficult material to work with also. So we're trying to come as close as possible to this original plate, and then to work with this in the lab. So the next steps will be to investigate more how these adhesive qualities of the mycelium, and then in a later stage of bacteria also, can be used to fix this copy of this Chinese plate. So I think these are the next steps. And then from the philosophical department, they will come next week actually to visit the biotechnology lab, and to create some sort of way to introduce the ethics, but starting from a questionnaire or a survey to see what do people even understand by ethics, and how do they feel about it, and how do they feel about working with these life forms that are so abstract. So we're trying to create a sort of questionnaire that we can maybe apply throughout the project at different moments, and see how working or introducing rituals and introducing other practices might change the answers to this questionnaire. So these are the two lines of working at the moment.
And this Japanese ritual I found also super striking. Yeah, I don't know if there is a similar practice, perhaps also to animals in Europe, but bacteria, I think, are still considered here like something almost non-living or like something that is similar to soil, or like, I don't know, non-living matter. Yeah, so I think of super interesting practice. And do you think also of kind of think of similar rituals, or like introducing something similar here, or do you think it will be clash of of ideas and clash of cultures then?
Indeed, I think the practice that they have in Japan comes out of this Buddhist understanding of that you can see God or Buddha in every entity. So I think this is very much rooted in their belief system. So I think we have to find something that makes sense for us. And I don't know yet what this is going to be. And I think there should be maybe two approaches. One in the laboratory itself, where the scientists are actually working with these entities. But I think this should also be published, because just as now in the last years, we have started to recognize plants as species that also have capacities to communicate and to, I mean, suddenly plants became much more than they were 20 years ago. And I think, or I'm hoping, that a similar development will happen with these more abstract life forms. Also by us understanding that we actually consist of all kinds of other entities, from bacteria to viruses and mycelium. I mean, we are full of other life forms. So we cannot even say anymore that we are just one, we are a consortium. So I think that the thinking is changing quite radically. So in that sense, the ritual or the practice that we want to propose should be in the lab, but also outside of the lab. So it should really reach also the general public.
Okay. You can also stop sharing. I think then we can each see each other much better. Okay, thank you so much. Then I think we will go further, and I would like to introduce our next speaker. It's Maya Dimitare. She's a new media artist and researcher working in the field of slow media art and deep sustainability. Her focus is food production, everyday eating habits, gardening, and the role of nature and environment in the lives of contemporary people living in the cities. Maya is going to present today on the topic of food and art.
Hello, and Christina, thank you for your presentation. It's a very, very interesting work, and I'm quite happy to continue the panel. I will share my screen. Okay, you should be able to.
It says that it has started, but I can see only the black. Now it's shared. You can also switch it probably in the full mode. Perhaps you won't see us then, but it's it's in the bottom. Yeah. Now we can see it in the full mode.
Yeah. Perfect. Yes, I will share my research on food and art, and I will also try to mention some background about myself. So I work in the field of new media art. The title comes from my study program in Riga University. I've been studying new media art for my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, and now I'm continuing the same place, also my doctoral research. And my research is about slow media art and deep sustainability. That is actually the title of my thesis. And my research is based on food. And food for me is the most sustainable medium that I could find, as I am researching sustainable art. I've try to make lists and checkpoints of what makes an artwork sustainable. And I have found that for me, food and gardening and growing food is the medium that I'm most interested in. I started researching food a couple of years ago, I think 7 years ago, when I started to take photos of all the food that I eat, with the goal to document and to archive the food that I should be growing to become the most self-sustainable, to reach self-sustainability. When I made this presentation, I did it over a couple of, 2 days. So I also included a slide of all the foods that I ate during the creation of this presentation. Just as an example of my food pictures. But when working with food, I will include now a tiny bit of a story about the Futurist Cookbook. And it is just for fun. It doesn't really influence my own research and my own practices. I just wanted to share a couple of food-related art types. So the Futurist Cookbook comes from Italy, as a lot of food-related things come from Italy. And this Futurist Cookbook by Filippo Marinetti, he was one of the futurists and a poet. So the Futurist Cookbook was aimed to offer a new way how to look at food, and that food is to blame that the Italian men were getting soft, and to go into this bright utopian future. They had to change the way they look at food, and also become a bit leaner. So, but it is a joke. The cookbook is a joke, and so it aims to include foods into art and food into everyday lives of all people, and presenting food as not just fuel to survive, but food as art, as experience, as sometimes you would, instead of eating your recipe, you would just make it, present it, smell it, and then walk away. And so you could also have food that is not meant for eating, or preparing food and you have to stroke something soft or something harsh while you eat to get all the sensation out of the experience. So parts of the Futurist Cookbook also included to avoid speeches, avoid politics while at the table, and to avoid knives and forks and instruments at your dinner. So to include also the tactile feeling of food consumption into your dinner experience. And this food, this obsession with food and how food can influence how we feel, how we think, how we see ourselves and our future. To me, that's the most interesting part of making sustainable artworks related to food. And food is included in all of our culture, and it's it's an experience, or it's just fuel. And we are kind of planning our lives around food and these meals that we are preparing, and a lot of our politics and economics is based on providing resources so we could have food. And we as educated people, we sometimes feel that we are so far above the human world, and I always call us the human animals, and my supervisor doesn't like me saying that. So she always comments on the human animal. That's not a nice thing to say because humans are so above animals, but we are not. If a human is hungry, I like the English word hungry, so irrational anger that comes from being hungry. And it's such a perfect word to describe this irrational anger, because you can't control it, and you can't meditate, you can't exercise, you can't educate yourself to be above being hungry. So for me, well, growing food is part of my practices, and it's a large part of what I do every day. I would just sit and think about new ways how I can grow food. All of it is meant to become a prototype, an example that I can present in a gallery or in an art space, that I can teach other people to grow food. And for me, teaching other people to grow food also comes from this. I want a lot of people to be more self-sustainable. However, a lot of it comes from my idea that if people would grow their own food, we would also find a new connection with our nature and our natural being as a human animal. Because growing food is if we grow our own food, we could learn to start to appreciate our food. And it's this futurist idea of involving all senses into your self-nutrition. And so I like to think that this Ikea effect could be also applied to our food. If we grow our own food, we could start appreciating our own food, and we could start appreciating our land a lot more than we are doing it now. So Ikea effect is it means that if something is hard, it has more value. So when you buy furniture and you put it together yourself, you value it more, and it doesn't matter if you put it together kind of sloppy or maybe made some mistakes, so it doesn't look as awesome as it would look like put together by professionals. But we value it a lot more. And for example, if people would buy a ready mixed cake, a mix that doesn't need the person doesn't need to add anything to the mix, versus the mix that has to have more input from the user. The person buying the mix will choose the one where you have to add eggs, for example, yourself, instead of you having a egg powder already in the mixture. So that's research from the 50s, when they noticed that by just making a person to add fresh eggs to the mix, the person, the housewife, valued the product a lot more. And now with the Ikea, well, we can call it the Ikea effect. I'm also researching if Ikea effect can be if gardening can also become a type of an IKEA effect. There's not that much research done, but there's some beginnings of some research about how about food and how to get children to eat their vegetables. So one of the ways how to get your child to eat more vegetables would be include the child into gardening practices. So this is these are the approaches that I've taken. So the do-it-yourself and food growing. So I am proposing different prototypes how I can teach a person to grow food at home and in a more sustainable way than normally people would be growing food. So this is one of my aquaponics prototypes that is now in the Nature House in Liepāja. And in this system we are growing just whatever is in the season or whatever I have at home. And in this aquaponics system, in the Nature House, the people are there, but to me, it feels like the feedback from the public is not as great as I imagine it would be. Because for me, this was very, very interesting. It was interesting to create this prototype, and it has 3D printed parts. It's automated. It has a Raspberry Pi, and it has a camera attached to it. So it has all the elements to make it interesting for a young teenager. However, the way how it looks like now in the Nature House, the people working there, I'm blaming them. I think they just don't have the interest or the vocabulary to talk about it. And so to move to the next step, how else to convince young teenagers that growing food is very, very fun, I also asked a 3D artist to make an AR version of this work. So it's based on the same design, so it's kind of the same thing, only now it's going to be in AR. Because we are working with AR in Liepāja for a second year now. So I'm curating a small sustainable arts exhibition now in our AR application. So I'm going to include this aquaponics model in AR, so I can have another medium how to convince young teenagers to grow their own food. As just an illustration, I put another work that is now in will be also in the exhibition, that is about lawns and how lawns are not sustainable. Just so inviting people to replace lawns with growing clover. This idea of putting plants into exhibition also is a bit challenging for me, because a lot of curators don't really see plants as exhibition piece. It's always a demand. It's like when I say I will put some boxes there, there will be aquaponics, there will be some schematics, a diary, some descriptions. Then I will get the question, but what is the artwork? So I'm also making videos of plants, proposing that maybe the time lapse of a plant growing can be the artwork. But I really don't like this question, this misunderstanding also in the field of sustainable art, in bioart, and eco art, or media art, and that the curators are asking, but what is the artwork? And a plant, even if as a prototype, is still not considered a finished artwork. It's just the background of something. So also the AR works, hopefully, can be something to offer to curators, that's it's an artwork because it's difficult. It was hard to make it, so it must be it must have value, and also it takes effort for the person to download the app, to find the artwork, to look at it. It's somewhat difficult, so that also adds the extra level of difficultness to make it to add more value to the artwork. Can you see the video clearly? Or is it a slideshow?
We can see it clearly.
Okay, great. This is 2 weeks of growing a tomato rendered into 10 seconds. And this is just an example of what I'm presenting as the final artwork. So the time-lapse videos. And also, I really like to make time lapses because it also shows the passing of time in a way that people seem to be hypnotized by the video. And when I show this video to just people on my phone, the people that I meet, they ask me, what do you do? Well, hydroponics, aquaponics is not interesting to most people, so at least I can show this video. When I've had experiences when people would just stare at this 10-second video for minutes, and they would not, they would refuse to give the phone back because they are hypnotized by the video. So yeah, that's why the videos and the augmented reality, I'm just trying to add levels of difficulty to my very basic growing of food practices, to add more value to this, to make it, to add more levels of mediums, so people would start get interested into growing food in more sustainable ways. So that's my story.
Okay, thank you so much, Maya. Are there any questions that you would like to ask Maya, perhaps? Okay, if there are no questions, thank you so much. I found super interesting aspects also in your presentation. But what I found like also super interesting, that you speaking about different aspects of your practice and of your work, you always mention that like people find it somehow not that super interesting, the growing experiment. So I'm like really interested of how you perhaps tried to connect to the audience, or like how you try to mediate your works, perhaps yourself also, because in Karlsruhe at least we have had quite different experience. We as already mentioned in the previous session, the ZKM, the institution where I work as curator, in the framework of one of the previous exhibitions, also rented an orchard, and people were super interested also, like the employees of the ZKM will now take care of this orchard for 5 years. And they were super interested in having like workshops and different activities there, and also really to have super hands-on practical things to do in the garden, also just to, as you said, also to reconnect to the basics, and also to understand how food is done. So I think there is like super potential in also having different activities around this, growing experiments, workshops, and like, what did you already try to somehow to actively mediate also your fascination for this life forms and for this for these growing activities?
I recently counted that I taught about 300 children and young people to make hydroponic systems at home. Out of those 300, I know one is continuing to grow food at home. It's there is interest, but it's not a long-term interest. And I'm now working also with actual gardeners, so people who own gardens, and they are working in gardens mostly because it's a tradition, because they have the land, they have the basic skills, and it's just very common for Latvians to have a garden. But how to convince them to, for example, stop using garden poisons, and how to understand the difference between sustainable gardening and unsustainable gardening. For example, another example is the lawns, and the fact that in Latvia we don't get the water ban on watering gardens. So our gardens are green whole summer long, and people are wasting a lot of water just watering their lawns every summer, and also gardening their greenhouses and their flower patches. So how to convince people to rethink the way how they prepare the soil, how they should be preparing their greenhouses, how they should be using different plant combinations to kind of fight against the pests that might be in the garden, instead of going straight to the poison. So that is my challenge, that is my interest, how to make this more sustainable, because the gardening practice is there, the interest is there, it's just not sustainable. For young people, it's just very short-lived. So if every month, or okay, not every month, every semester, I would go to one of my local high schools to have a class, and we would start growing food. They would grow it, they would research it, they would have journals, they would present it at the end. Super interested. When I leave, nothing stays. It's just it's a nice little fun memory. And next semester they would invite me again, and I will start from zero. Because the children and the teachers, it's for them, it's just fun. It's not, they don't see it as a real activity.
But I think fun is also good entry into something. So perhaps there is a way to somehow make it more long-term interest. But also what we had super good also experiences here in Karlsruhe with working with giving workshops from the city, like people who professionally take care, for example, of garden or of orchards, who really explain also the value of the ecosystem to the public and from their perspective. So we tried to combine also different perspectives to engage with community also on a long-term basis. Yeah, probably it's also might be an idea to join forces with different professionals also from the field to see what is their also experience and how to do it together. Okay.
No, it's just it's a very quite fun to listen to your presentation, to your experience, because to me, I see also that my city is watering lawns in parks in Liepāja. So in August, there's just a truck of 2 tons of water driving around the city, watering grass in bus stops. And for me, that's just insane. That looks insane. It's just weird. And yeah, that is my research, what I'm trying to describe, this insanity that is happening here of the unsustainable gardening. But I'm very happy that you've had better luck.
Yeah, these are like splinters of different realities, I understand. It's kind of, yeah. But probably let's stay in conversation. Perhaps we can, I don't know, find a dialogue, see, yeah, how we can, I don't know, activate the growing experiments. Super. Then our next speaker. Sorry, I muted myself. Our next speaker is Christina Winker. Christina, are you around? I don't see you. Yes, you are here.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I will just shortly introduce you. You live and work in Karlsruhe and study media arts at the Karlsruhe University of Arts and Design. You hold a bachelor and master degree in industrial engineering, also that you got at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Karlsruhe. You have been publishing papers about computer science and at art conferences, and in your interdisciplinary and multimedia artistic research and practice, you deal mostly with the means of human perception. Thank you so much for joining, and we're all, I think, excited to about your presentation, Homo Deus.
Yeah, and thank you, Daria, also for your nicely introduction, also with Bruno Latour, because my work is very closely related to his work. And also thank you, Christina and Maya, for your very, very nice presentations.
Thanks. You can share the screen and just jump directly into the topic.
Okay. One sec. Yeah. So can you see everything quite nice and hear me good?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm talking about my final project in HFG, where what I did now to get my diploma. It's called Homo Deus, and I will first explain what I did, and then I will also explain the way how it developed, the idea, and how I got there. So here, this is in the it's called the Lichthof in HFG Karlsruhe. It's the place between the two ZKM museums, and here you can see my installation. I had two plexiglass boxes, and within the plexiglass boxes there were two glasses. And in the glasses, I grew an agar-agar cress. Agar-agar is in biological science used to grow plants. They use agar-agar, give also nutritions to it. Then the plants grow, and then they take them to a field and to do their research, and they grow it in agar-agar to keep the plants comparable. Therefore, I did it also, and cress you can grow very easily in agar-agar. You don't have to put any nutritions to it. So it's just the agar-agar where I grew it, and the experiment lasted 6 days. And one of the class I read every 18 hours a lecture from the book Bruno Latour, Facing Gaia. You can see it here, which one it is. It's the glass with the microphone in front of it. And every lecture was recorded. And there were also in the plexiglass box of the cress where I read two little loudspeakers. So the recorded lecture was looped, and the cress could hear it again, until after 18 hours I read the next lecture, and it shouldn't be so loud in the plexiglass box. It was quite good to hear, but because of the boxes. You couldn't hear it outside so well, and it was also meant to be this design because the other plant should live in silence and the other plant should be spoken to, and the distance wasn't that big. And to keep it quite scientific, I choose not to make the loudness level too high, and therefore you see also the earphone. Then the visitors could take the earphones and hear what the plants hear. And also with the other box, you see there with the earphone, you heard nothing. And in the box, there were also growth lamps for the plants, and to keep the two boxes quite the same, I had also two Raspberry Pis, and to the Raspberry Pis there were connected humidity sensor, a temperature sensor, CO2 sensor, visible light sensor, infrared and UV sensor, because I did some research in before what influences the growth of the cress, and it was said the CO2 level and also light, temperature and humidity. And the one important thing why I choose cress is cress grows really fast. You have only, from beginning I had only the seeds, and then they grow within 6 days very fast. And what I found out in my research is also that cress can be used also as a measurement for the goodness of the air, because cress don't like polluted air. And also if you have at home to build your own fertilizer, when you have waste, bio waste, and you let them grow to fertilize the fields, and you don't know if it's ready yet, you can also test it by cress. So this I found also two very interesting effects about cress. And here is the statement of Bruno Latour I found very interesting in the book Facing Gaia, which is also directly related to this artwork. Facts that have become undeniable in the scientific fields are, according to Bruno Latour, not provided by approved disciplines such as particle physics or mathematics, but assembled by a multitude of empirical field studies that emerge from the intersections of hundreds of thousands of tiny detailed in models, developed surveys, creating data, each of which remains open to attack. So, and this I found very interesting, and it refers also to my first studies where I did as master thesis also empirical work. So I also now what problems can there occur also with measurements and statistics. And also according to philosophy, you can only know what you experience yourself, and the other things you can only believe. And according to empirical scientific studies, plants grow better when you speak to them. And therefore I said to myself, oh, then I have to test it on my own. And therefore I choose this design and this reenactment of the reenactment of a scientific experiment, and to disprove or prove Bruno Latour's thesis was my intention. And part of the installation was also my working space, where I plotted out the data from the sensors. And I placed the table so that I could see both plexiglass boxes very good. And here you see some of the papers where I put the data every day and compared the growth of the plants and also the data of the sensors. And as I told you, I wanted to tell a little bit the background why I came to this. This is my diploma thesis, where I did I worked with virtual reality and memorization. If virtual reality could affect positively memorization, and this was also published at a computer science conference. So my background, and then another point was the Critical Zones exhibition in ZKM, where I had the chance to get to know Mr. Bruno Latour in person, and also be part of a workshop with him, and got also in touch with his ideas and also the Gaia hypothesis. And then I did, after the workshop, I exhibited in China also these plexiglass boxes. This was moss. And you have their ventilators, and you have a particulate matter sensor within there. And if the air in the moss cleans the air, and if the air becomes like the level in Europe, the ventilator puts more bad air in this plexiglass box. And this I exhibited in China, also referring to the Gaia hypothesis created by the microbiologist Lynn Margulis and the chemist, biophysics, and medical scientist James Lovelock in the mid-1960s. The Gaia hypothesis states that the globe and its biosphere can be observed as a living organism. Insofar, the biosphere creates and sustains living conditions and the evolution of complex organisms. This leads to various interferences between nature and culture, between technological interventions and the globe's ecosystem, originating to the following question: will the globe as a living organism recreate itself, or will it starve as technical innovations are taking its living conditions away? And the installation Particulate Matters seeks to deal with this question by utilizing an experimental design. So, and regarding to the sensor data I took, it was when the experiment started, every 1 minute, data were stored into a file of this, what I said before, humidity sensor, temperature sensor, CO2 sensor, visible light sensor, and infrared sensor, and UV sensor, just to prove that there are comparable conditions in both plexiglass boxes. And I did also 24-hour monitoring. So I did, here you see the grow light, and here a little Raspberry Pi camera. And I did 2 websites where you could monitor the growth of the cress from your from home. So I could see from my home place the growth of the cress 24 hours, 6 days. And I found it also what you said very nicely with the tomatoes, because this I did also here, because I took also every minute a photo of this to be able to create a time lapse after this. So, and here is the glass of the control group, here the glass of the experimental group, and here was the result of the last day. On the right side, you see the control group cress didn't grow so good like the cress I read the Bruno Latour to. And with Naya and with the City of Meteor Arts, I want to go also develop this further in public space, also with talking to plants combined with augmented reality. This is my what I want to do in future. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Christina. Any questions or immediate response from the group? No? Yeah, thank you so much. I find it's like also a project that has yeah, this somehow also humorous side, because I find that like reading Bruno Latour to plants that yeah, that are basically part of, yeah, of this anthropocenic situation is a nice also twist in the artwork. So I find it's like really super combination of this staged scientific experiment and also of this twist of reading Bruno Latour. Yeah, if you, yeah, we can also move forward and discuss further, because we have still 20 minutes for also for Juan. Probably let's do like this, if we have time at the end, and we can also probably discuss a bit more, if you agree.
And if I want, I can also show you only 10 seconds if you're curious how I read to the plants.
Yeah. Would you like to do it now or afterwards?
I can do it very quickly now.
Okay, let's do it now.
Yeah, I just have to finish my yeah, very quickly. Here you can
I think we cannot hear it because when sharing, you need also to share the sound. It's in the window when you start sharing.
No, but it's in German, so it's in German. So I just wanted to show you the no, that you get a little bit optical impression. and every 18 hours I had to read 2 hours to them, because a lecture took me almost 2 hours to read.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a lot of effort, but did you manage to read all the book, all the lectures?
Yeah, I read the whole book to the class.
Okay, but that's a fantastic also result. You need to inform Brunella too about, about this results.
I think this is now the world educated, best educated press in the world.
Nice.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Okay, we are moving to the final presentation, to the next presentation for today. It's by Juan Dua De Regino, who is a PhD artist researcher at Aalto University, working with environmental sound to explore sensing in between nature and technology. Juan is interested in developing methods for augmented listening, which combine machine learning with remote sensing, and also to expand human sensory. His proposal attempts to redefine human and machine listening from a manifold worldview. His work comprises lectures, workshops, and also sound interventions. Thank you so much, Juan, and the stage is yours. Please go on.
Thank you very much, Daria. And it's really an honor to share my presentation with people from ZKM and with the family of RIXC, which is familiar and nice always to encounter. So this presentation, Sensing and Forecasting Atmospheric Soundscapes, is formulating some ideas that I will try to refine later into writing an academic paper, and thus your input and feedback is very highly appreciated. My artistic research has engaged with sound experiences related to environmental agencies, in particular the wind and air. This exploration was motivated by making distinct these elusive and often complex physical phenomena. The translation of these waves into audible signals is by all means created using digital media, such as embedded in physical computing. From crafting devices with interactive sensing media, I move into making sound from their outcoming data, applying different sorts of environmental sensors to obtain real-time data from measuring motion, wind force, and air qualities, to make perceivable wind flux through sonic engines, including digital and analog synthesizers. Besides, sensing systems involve interfaces to reveal their potentialities of operability with environments and with human control. When these are interfaced with existing artifacts or instruments, they create an ensemble of augmented agency and interoperability in and with the surrounding environment. In the search for interfacing sensing media to the wind, this led me to explore the antique talent of kite flying to augment the underlying forces from the wind flux. In Pulsar Kite, my approach was to design different sorts of affordances between the kite's motion and generative sound, while drawing attention to the interplay between human control and environmental agency. This was presented in performances and developed over a number of artist residencies. Pulsar Kite gave me insights about the intricate relations between sound and the atmosphere. Moreover, it led me to investigate the history of specific sound instruments with relation to the environment, to environmental wind and air flux. That is to say, exploring a wider scope of artful science experiments where human and technological sensorium meet with the spatial surroundings. In other words, what I currently describe as hybrid listening of atmospheric soundscapes. The work of Athanasius Kircher evidenced a myriad of explorations with sound. Particularly from his book, Musurgia Universalis, I encountered this Aeolian harp, which signified a groundwork in my study. It established the deep time of environmental instruments with artistic and scientific qualities. These past manifestations are somehow resisting the progressive techno-optimism of the so-called new media, and they resonate persisting in today's association of art and science and technology. A cooperation of this sort is capable of orienting technological development while elucidating the dynamics of wind flux through musical sensibility and craft. At the same time, these illustrations in artistic and scientific terms do not contribute to privileged technology or science alone. Peculiarly, these ancient manifestations give room to mythological and speculative conceptions which are relative to the kind of terrestrial coexistence, meaning that they give a voice to the more than human energies and dynamics involved in air and wind. In short, these artifacts resonates with the atmosphere as a medium. The Aeolian harp embodies the atmosphere dynamics to be perceivable by humans. Accordingly, I move into the quest for creating a kind of Aeolian artifact which senses atmospheric dynamics and returns an outcome into the ether. My following project in environmental sound, Aeolian artifacts, measures wind forces in 4 Cartesian directions and creates sonic patterns following wind dynamics from each of these sensing points. The resulting sound from this device is transmitted over radio in order to experiment with potential correlations between wind and electromagnetic energies. In the aftermath of the project, these kind of questions emerge. Are the wind and the electromagnetic fields possible to interact in such meandering ways? Is it possible to create a communication channel across seemingly diverse environmental media? I will return to these questions later on. Recently, I regard sensing the atmosphere from a deep time perspective, looking into tools, methods, and objects of sensing, not only by technological or embodied means, but also including the meanings and knowledge implied in atmospheric ontologies. Recent media theory has expressed that mythology and phenomenology have similarity in grasping conceptually the ephemeral and long-standing time dynamics of the atmospheric climate and weather. Until the mid-18th century, climate was associated with geographical coordinates, but not to weather conditions. Both ancient and modern conceptions of climate have in common a celestial origin, a godlike point of view that is able to see Earth from outside. From a Platonic reasoning, these sort of mythologies do not oppose rational argumentations. Instead, myths have a role in making us see, opening up perception and experience to renewed interpretation in particular ways. Platonic understanding of myth refers to an education of vision insofar as it makes us see differently. The well-known allegory of the cave serves as a critique to ocular centrism due to our excessive dependence on the sense of sight and reliance on the self-appearance to the nature of vision and its objects. The ancient art of aeromancy involves divinatory practices based on observing atmospheric events by looking at the clouds, sensing the wind, and foretelling the changes in relations to animal behavior with more than human sensing capabilities. Divination based on looking at the bird's behavior derived augury and ornithomancy, which is the capacity to foretell future events that affect people's lives in a more extensive scope. Examples of augury are found in the ancient Roman mythology and the foundation of the ancient Mexico City. From aeromancy and augury and other pre-scientific practices of divination, I am interested in how the more than human and complexity of the weather are taken into account to look beyond present human perception. Is it a coincidence that ancient cultures valued animal senses into atmospheric and other sorts of prediction? Recent scientific research claims that several migratory birds species employ magnetoception, mainly located at their beaks, where particles of magnetite provide an embedded geographical sense, and due to the cryptochromes in their eyes, enable to detect planetary magnetic fields. On top of that, infrasonic listening allows to anticipate storms and other extreme weather conditions. The researcher Star Rogers reviews technologies as a means of modern divination. She claims that they can bring meaning by directing our attention to things we cannot normally or do not usually sense. That is what we can interpret from the natural world, which may be beyond our usual senses. Sensing the atmosphere from a perspective of divination means to contemplate the surroundings in search for answers to these questions. Is connecting ancient and modern worldviews a way to look into the future, or a way to reveal what is invisible here in our present moment? The Treatise on Meteorology by Aristotle was the first one to make descriptions of weather based on observations of the four elements. The combination of earth, water, and wind was described already to give rise to tornadoes and storms. The study of meteorology gave rise to the methodology of observation to sense and measurement of weather conditions. Early instruments for precise measurements, such as the hygrometer, to obtain humidity levels from soil and air, comparing the difference of weight from a paper with charcoal exposed to the air in comparison to one non-exposed. Following is a quote by Benson. At the turn of the 20th century, meteorologists focused largely on surface weather conditions. They had a sparse number of stations connected with telegraph lines, no observations over the oceans or unpopulated areas, and few upper air measurements. Wireless telegraphy was just emerging, rockets were fireworks. Earth had no satellite known as the moon, and computers were people. End of the quote. The atmosphere is like an ocean of oxygen. Oceans retain much more energy than the air, moderating changes of temperature in the atmosphere. The winds and currents of the globe are never at rest. They circulate endlessly in large and small vortices called solenoids. The system always seeks equilibrium, but never attains it. Since the late 19th century, the combination of statistics achieved prominence and climatology became a dominant practice. Aerology held great promise, but the filters of kites and balloons were empiricists too and had yet to identify governing principles. Norwegian scientist Willem Bjerknes aligned meteorology with physical laws rather than art or craft. Bjerknes had sketched out a method based on observations on the laws of dynamics and thermodynamics for forecasting the weather and the future state of the sea. Weather prediction for Bjerknes involved the calculation of 7 quantities: velocity in 3 dimensions, pressure, density, temperature, and humidity. Bjerknes' prior work on electrodynamics and experience with wireless telegraphy gave him insights on studying the hydrodynamic waves propagating in the real fluid atmosphere and oceans of the planet. The Bergen School developed scientific weather analysis and forecasting based on meteorological observations, tools for evaluating data, and models for atmospheric structure and their degree of rational physical approach to the problem. Such methods were aimed at turning every new weather analysis, whether for research or forecasting, into a creative moment of discovery, not to replace intuition, but to enhance it. Coming back to my earlier inquiry to the interrelation between wind and electromagnetism, the upper atmosphere became known as the ionosphere in 1926 when Robert Watt defined this region as populated with free electrons that allow the proliferation of radio waves. This led to the possibility of forecasting ionospheric weather, or the electrical state of the upper atmosphere. Dynamic meteorologists saw correlations between the state of the upper atmosphere and surface weather conditions, high values of ozone with low pressure systems, ionization with thunderstorms, and radio echoes with movements of polar, maritime, and equatorial air masses. Numerical weather prediction was promoted from the beginning of computing as we know it. This was led by John von Neumann, who saw parallels between the science of nuclear weapons and the non-linear physics of weather. Likewise, upper air data collections during the World War II were needed because military aviators need to know the conditions in the upper atmosphere. Bjerknes' student Carl Gustav Rosby during the World War II had organized the training of US military meteorologists and provided von Neumann with theoretical background for weather simulations, laying out the known mathematics and defining the unsolved problems. The ENIAC computer was put under test to forecast weather under previous models of prediction developed by the Bergen School. Analysis maps connected data points for pressure, temperature, and other variables. From the full set of maps, forecasters could develop a mental model of 3-dimensional weather system. The direction, shape, and spacing of data points relied heavily on heuristic principles and the forecaster's experience. By the mid-20th century, the implementation of weather forecasting with the ENIAC were implemented successfully worldwide, except for Soviet meteorologists, who developed forecast models more or less independently of Western science. It took several decades for computer models to approach human forecast skill. I'm closing now, more or less I hope I still have a okay time, but okay, so if not, just let me know. So more recently, polysemy across terms from weather forecasting became an object of inquiry for my research, and I propose that the relation among the terms forecasting, premonition, and prognosis is beyond mere synonyms. Their meaning, I think, transcends into modern scientific understandings of the weather. So why is a medium in the colloquial sense used to describe a person with premonitory capabilities and acute senses for interceding with the divine and the unearthly? Where is the position of inhabiting atmospheric sensing and forecasting otherwise? Having these notions in mind, I propose to work in the following stages of my research to apply machine learning using pre-recorded and real-time sensor data from previously built weather stations. Thus, the first part of the training involves creating a learning model that sources atmospheric signals to find possible correlations between these winds and natural radio, and forecast its future events and dynamics. The second part of the training involves that the software associates weather events with weather mythologies to generate semiotic content from links and predictions. The generative text will create semantic contents to guide a deep listening of atmospheric prognosis, a sort of ritual of divination. This part comprises modeling a system according to ancient mythologies on weather forecasting with manifestations and narratives around electromagnetic signals. The final part of this training should involve experimenting with deep learning models for sound generation based on the prior two parts. And in brief, this will imply the neural networks based on MetNet2 deep learning. And the second part implies this TensorFlow and Keras, and finally, deep learning for audio software. As an inspiration and prior experimentation with these machine learning technologies, I would like to show you some images generated with stable diffusion, which frame the intentionality of combining mythological and computational atmospheric forecasting. These images were generated using certain words like mythologies of sensing the atmosphere, and they're artificially generated from a repository of images. So I'm trying to speculate and thinking about how this crossing between mythology and sensing devices could start looking like. And for that now, I thank you so much, and I welcome your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan, for this almost lecture performance. I would say it was so visually rich, and also informationally was super rich, and also shows, of course, that we have tried always to, or like for several centuries already, to use media to sense and to augment the sensorial that we have from nature. Thank you so much. I don't know if there are there any questions like from the audience? If there are no questions, I think I'm afraid that we almost ran out of time. So I would like to wrap up the session and to thank you so much for all the presentations. I found at the end that it was somehow very harmonious, also set of presentations, because we started with this presentation by Christina about back to healing and about kintsugi technique that was inspiration for the scientific research and artistic process. And then we ended also with Juan's presentation going also deep into the deep time of media and also traditional knowledge and science. So I found this like super nice also end of the session. And of course the presentations of Christina and Maya were also somehow corresponding quite well because of this growing activity of plants, but seen of course through quite different lenses. Thank you so much. And the conference goes further. So we will have now a little break. And I think the next session is in, please correct me, 1 hour and 20 minutes. So we have now like kind of break for lunch, and I'm a bit hungry. Thank you for this new word also. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.